Imagine a world where power is absolute and betrayal is a daily occurrence. Welcome to the story of Santo Trafficante Jr., a man who turned the streets of Tampa into his personal empire and made Havana dance to the rhythm of his criminal symphony. Picture this: a young Italian-American raised in the shadows of Florida's underworld who would go on to challenge Fidel Castro, collaborate with the CIA, and find himself at the center of one of the most shocking events in American history, the assassination of John F. Kennedy. From the smoke-filled backrooms of Tampa to the sun-drenched shores of Cuba, from clandestine meetings with intelligence agencies to explosive allegations about presidential assassinations, the life of Santo Trafficante Jr. reads like a Hollywood script too outrageous to be true. Yet, every twist and turn of his story is rooted in a reality stranger than fiction. Join us as we unravel the enigma of the man who went from being Fidel Castro's nemesis to a potential conspirator in the death of a US president. This is the tale of Santo Trafficante Jr., a gangster who left an indelible mark on American history. Santo Trafficante Jr. was a mobster who enjoyed the melodious Italian accordion and the danceable Cuban guaguancó. However, his true passion was not music, but gambling and drugs, where he reigned mercilessly on the East Coast of the United States. With Sicilian ancestry and a cunning ability to forge alliances, he became a criminal leader as powerful as he was ruthless. Leaders across the continent followed his directives. A communist revolution was a thorn in his side, and his collaborations with the CIA were nothing more than a gift in exchange for valuable time. It is even said that the death of one of the most powerful men on the planet could have been orchestrated by him. This is the infamous life of Santo Trafficante Jr. Santo Trafficante Jr. emerged in a world saturated with shadows and secrets on November 15, 1914, in Tampa, Florida, United States. He was born into a difficult context for the community to which he belonged. The history of Italian Americans in Florida in the early 20th century was plagued with hope, struggle, and a touch of Mafia resilience. Between 1880 and 1915, approximately 4 million Italians emigrated to the United States in search of a more promising future. Many of them, mostly from Sicily, found a new home in Florida. Tampa, with its growing tobacco industry and flourishing fruit trade, became a magnet for these immigrants. The promise of work in cigar factories and citrus orchards attracted a wave of Italians who also ventured into other professions such as real estate, barbering, butchery, and tailoring. However, it was not an easy path. Italian immigrants faced relentless exploitation by the padroni, Italian intermediaries who controlled their wages, transportation, and living conditions, all for a fee. Social peace was a luxury they could not afford. Racial tensions and labor conflicts were a daily occurrence. During this time, an Italian was lynched in Tampa during a labor strike, an event that reflected the fear and hostility they faced. This episode, although isolated in Florida, resonated with the more frequent lynchings in places like Louisiana, where the Black Hand, an Italian criminal organization, fueled the flames of fear and xenophobia. However, the Italian-American community in Florida did not succumb. Many families developed and prospered, creating vibrant cultural enclaves where music, theater, and festivals were everyday occurrences. They also supported Italian-language newspapers and social clubs, creating a microcosm of their homeland in the New World. But the influence of the Italian-American community was not limited to the cultural sphere. Their contribution to Florida's industrial and agricultural development was significant. They distinguished themselves as dedicated workers and skilled artisans, playing a crucial role in the region's economic growth. They also helped to establish Florida as an important fruit production center. Nonetheless, the roots of the future Floridian gangster bore a resemblance more to those of the Black Hand than to the regional agricultural sector. The cradle of Santo Trafficante Jr. was covered by the dark mantle of the criminal underworld. As the son of the infamous Santo Trafficante Sr., a Sicilian crime titan who ruled the Tampa underworld with an iron fist, and his mother, Maria Giuseppa Cacciatore, the shadow of Santo Sr., loomed cold and dominant over the young Trafficante. He was one of the many Italians who found refuge in the vast lands of North America. It is said that his father's words were like sacred orders and his cruel wisdom an infallible guide in the murky waters they navigated. Although not fully documented, it is believed that Trafficante Jr. dropped out of school at some point during high school, probably in the 9th or 10th grade. Consequently, it can be inferred that most of his education was limited and informal. Regardless, his education was not confined to conventional classrooms. It was always imbued with the subtle arts of manipulation and infamy. It is very likely that his father educated him in the business of gambling and the Mafia from a very young age. He had ample opportunity to learn about these matters, as Trafficante Sr.'s experiences provided enough material to make him an authentic master of crime. With the end of Prohibition in the mid-1930s, Trafficante Sr.'s criminal machinery thrived. His strategic alliance with the titans of the national Mafia ensured the expansion of his shady operations beyond the borders of Florida. Amidst the smoke of cigars and the clinking of glasses, the bond between father and son was forged. It is very likely that the two indulged more than once in the pleasures of gambling and partying in Florida and Cuba, as the father greatly enjoyed such gatherings. The Trafficante family was also particularly famous for using a language called Tampan, a dialect that combined Italian and Spanish. It was a sort of encrypted language spoken by the Floridian Mafia, so that the police could not understand their communications. By the 1930s, Santo Jr. emerged, following in his father's footsteps, who had consolidated his dominance over Florida's rival gangs. When our protagonist joined his father in this complex endeavor, he did so not as a mere pawn, but as a strategist in training. As Trafficante Sr. unified the criminal factions under the family's banner, his son stood out for his ability to manage operations and maintain discipline within the organization. However, not everything in our protagonist's life revolved around crime and breaking the law. Santo Trafficante Jr. found time amidst his businesses to marry Josephine Marchese on April 17, 1938. His wife, known thereafter as Josephine Yuyu Trafficante, was born in Tampa 6 years after him and also descended from Sicilian immigrants. Together, they had 2 daughters. Despite being married to one of the most notorious mobsters in the region, Josephine preferred to dedicate her time to cooking, knitting, and family trips. She exemplified the typical housewife, managing the duality of being a devoted mother while her husband wove a corrupt and vice-ridden network. By the 1940s, Santo Jr. had risen to become one of the most powerful mobsters in the region. His empire encompassed not only traditional criminal activities such as gambling and drug trafficking, but also an intricate web of political and economic influences. His reach quickly expanded from the alleys of Tampa to the avenues of Havana, where his ability to combine legitimate businesses with illegal operations allowed him to create an unprecedented power network. The Trafficante family, leveraging their economic position and the threat of violence, formed a strong alliance with Fulgencio Batista's government in Cuba during Batista's first term as president. The relationship between the Cuban leader and the Floridian capo was very close from the beginning. Batista was dominated by Trafficante and granted him enough permits for the Mafia to operate in Cuba, turning the island into a hub of narcotics trafficking, prostitution, and organized crime. Until 1959, no new Cuban government dared to dismantle the benefits approved by Batista that organized crime enjoyed. In fact, in 1946, Santo Sr. sent his son to Cuba to invest in the growing number of nightclubs and casinos in the island nation. By this time, Santo Jr. had already become the underboss of the Trafficante family. However, father and son mobsters never achieved their main goal of monopolizing the gambling business on the island. Among their legitimate businesses, the casinos in Cuba stood out as their crown jewels. These establishments were an endless source of income and became true nerve centers where politicians, celebrities, businessmen, and other mobsters converged. In Havana, their investments in an open-air theater and a popular self-service restaurant showcased their ability to disguise their true interests behind a facade of financial integrity. Meanwhile, in Tampa, they diversified their businesses with investments in the iconic Columbia restaurant, one of the oldest and most prestigious restaurants in the region, along with several other bars and eateries. Besides the significant profits they generated, these establishments served as nodes in a vast network of influence and relationships that he meticulously cultivated. Here, the clinking of wine glasses often accompanied conversations of conspiracy and betrayal involving substantial sums of money. Through his casinos and restaurants, Santo Trafficante Jr. established contacts with other criminals, corrupt politicians, and greedy businessmen. Each forged relationship added another thread to his web of power. His movements were meticulously planned and his loyalties carefully selected to avoid attracting unnecessary attention. During these years, Santo Trafficante Jr. maintained ties with the Bonanno family in New York City, enabling him to expand his operations nationally. Additionally, he was closely associated with Salvatore Sam Giancana, a significant Chicago boss involved in similar businesses: gambling, illegal liquor distribution, and political fraud. By 1946, Giancana's influence was so vast that he was invited to an event that would alter the course of organized crime in America, the Havana Conference. The decision to hold this historic gathering in the city is another stark reminder of Fulgencio Batista's commitment to the flourishing of organized crime. This landmark event brought together heavyweights from the American Mafia, the Jewish crime syndicate, and leaders of the Cosa Nostra under the glittering facade of the Hotel Nacional. Orchestrated by the infamous Charles Lucky Luciano, former head of the Luciano family and co-founder of the Italian Mafia Commission in the United States, the conference became the epicenter of decisions that resonated throughout the Western Hemisphere. It was also organized by Meyer Lansky, head of the Jewish crime syndicate and a key financial advisor for Italian Mafia gambling operations in the US. He was a mastermind of illicit finance. The conference wasn't just a simple social gathering, but a carefully planned conclave of the most dangerous mafia minds. It aimed to discuss political matters, establish operating norms, and consolidate business interests that transcended borders. At a time when the American Mafia was extending its tentacles into Latin America, this meeting was crucial for forging alliances and solid agreements with other crime leaders in the region. It was considered the most significant gathering since the Atlantic City Conference held 17 years earlier. The event was also highly profitable for Lucky Luciano, who had endured a tumultuous exile with difficulties remaining on American soil. Participants decided to gift him envelopes containing cash, totaling around $200,000. In this den of vipers, Santo Trafficante Jr. emerged as a key player, recognized as one of the most powerful mafiosos in the southern United States. Known for his cunning and firm hand in drug trafficking, Santo Trafficante Jr.'s stance at the Havana conference was clear: to expand and consolidate narcotics routes and operations, ensuring that the Mafia maintained control and maximized profits. The repercussions of the Havana conference were profound and long-lasting. The consolidation of alliances and agreements among organized crime leaders facilitated the expansion of American Mafia operations in Latin America. Moreover, the pacts sealed in the luxurious halls of the Hotel Nacional not only bolstered Mafia power in the region, but also laid the groundwork for a global drug trafficking network that would persist for decades. In the following decade, stomach cancer, which he had been silently suffering from, silenced one of the most influential mafiosos of his time forever, Santo Trafficante Sr. His death on April 11, 1954, at the age of 68, left a void in the heart of the criminal empire he had forged with intelligence and cruelty. He was laid to rest in the Italian Club Cemetery in Ybor City. In Tampa, Florida, this was a place that reflected his Italian roots and the influence he had wielded over the Italian-American community. With his father's death, Santo Trafficante Jr. found himself at the helm of a vast criminal empire. He had learned from the best and was prepared to continue the family legacy. The time had come for Santo Trafficante Jr. to ascend from underboss to boss of the infamous Trafficante family. The transition of power was not easy, but Santo Jr. was ready to face the challenges ahead. He inherited not only the businesses, but also the strategic alliances, enemies, and the training imparted by his father. Beyond this family matter, Trafficante Jr. continued to consolidate his power in Florida. He also established an intricate narcotics trafficking network that stretched all the way to New York City, collaborating closely with Tommy the Barber Lucchese, boss of the Lucchese crime family, one of the 5 most powerful in the city. Trafficante Jr. managed a narcotics operation that ran like a well-oiled machine. His relationship with Lucchese was more than just a strategic alliance. It was rooted in their earlier connection when the young Trafficante was groomed in the dark arts of the Mafia under his father's guidance and had the opportunity to meet him. Their meetings were not cold, tense, or calculated transactions. On the contrary, Trafficante and Lucchese understood each other effortlessly in the world of crime. They were good friends and frequently dined together in New York City. During this decade, Trafficante Jr. was arrested numerous times for bribery charges and for operating the infamous illegal lottery known as Bolita in the bustling district of Ybor City, Tampa. However, in a nearly theatrical twist of events, Trafficante managed to evade conviction on each occasion, including when he was sentenced to 5 years for bribery. The Florida Supreme Court overturned the sentence before he set foot in prison, thanks to his intricate network of contacts. Each arrest was merely a minor inconvenience, swiftly resolved with a bribe here and a veiled threat there. The Appalachin meeting, held on November 14, 1957, in the quiet town of Appalachin, New York, stands as a pivotal event in the history of organized crime in the United States. It had clear and well-defined objectives to discuss and coordinate various illegal activities that generated millions of dollars for the Mafia. Topics included gambling, casino management, and narcotics trafficking, which formed the backbone of Mafia operations at the time. These illicit businesses required meticulous coordination to avoid conflicts and maximize profits for the members of the Mafia Commission, the governing body of the meeting. Additionally, a critical point on the agenda was the division of operations previously under the control of Albert Anastasia, a feared Mafia boss who had recently been assassinated. Albert Anastasia, born in Calabria, Italy, in 1902, is a prominent figure in organized crime history due to his leadership of the Gambino crime family and his ruthless reputation in the underworld. Known as the Mad Hatter, or Lord High Executioner, Anastasia was notorious for his brutal tactics and his role in expanding Mafia influence across various illicit enterprises. The aftermath of Anastasia's assassination left a significant power vacuum within the Mafia hierarchy, prompting urgent discussions at Appalachin about how to redistribute territories and maintain stability within the criminal organization. This meeting underscored the Mafia's reach into illegal activities and its efforts to consolidate power while inadvertently drawing unwanted attention from law enforcement, marking a turning point in how organized crime was perceived and pursued in the United States. Albert Anastasia, known for his brutality and meteoric rise to power, was deeply involved in a range of criminal activities and enterprises. He was notably one of the architects behind Murder, Inc., the ruthless assassination squad of the National Crime Syndicate. Anastasia's ability to impose order through fear and violence was unparalleled, cementing his reputation as a formidable figure in organized crime. He also ascended within the ranks of the International Longshoremen's Association, becoming a powerful figure within the union. Using his position, Anastasia controlled waterfront operations and engaged in various illicit activities, leveraging his influence for personal gain. Following World War II, Anastasia diversified his interests by investing in a garment factory. This legitimate front allowed him to maintain a facade of legality while continuing his criminal enterprises. These ventures were highly profitable, and Anastasia's criminal activities generated substantial income, making him a valuable asset to the Mafia Commission. However, Anastasia's career began to falter in the early 1950s. Legal problems, including accusations of denaturalization and tax evasion, started to accumulate. Additionally, his leadership was challenged by powerful figures such as Vito Genovese, Joseph Profaci, and Carlo Gambino. The climax of his downfall came on October 25, 1957, when Anastasia was murdered in a barbershop at the Park Sheraton Hotel in Manhattan. Anastasia's death created a power vacuum and an urgent need to redistribute his lucrative operations among the various Mafia bosses present. Returning to Appalachin, the estate of Joseph Barbara in Appalachin was chosen as the location for this secret meeting due to its rural and seemingly secure location. Barbara was the boss of the northeastern Pennsylvania crime family and had successfully organized a smaller meeting there the previous year. Santo Trafficante Jr. attended the event to control organized crime operations in Florida and Cuba. His presence at the Appalachin meeting underscores his importance within the Mafia, and he probably participated actively in the discussions. The discussions about the distribution of illegal activities protected his interests within the United States and the Caribbean island, with control over gambling and narcotics trafficking. Trafficante was determined to maintain and expand his influence. However, the choice turned out to be a catastrophic mistake. Local and federal authorities were increasingly aware of Barbara's and other mobsters' activities. Their meticulous and intensified surveillance led to the event's dramatic downfall. Indeed, the Appalachin meeting was abruptly interrupted by state police and federal agents. Authorities' suspicions about the unusual concentration of luxury cars at Barbara's estate led to an operation resulting in the arrest of numerous mobsters. It is considered a masterstroke by law enforcement officials, who managed to arrest around 60 men out of the estimated 100 attendees. Among those detained was Santo Trafficante Jr. His arrest was noteworthy because he was a key figure in organized crime operations. A man accustomed to operating from the shadows and maintaining a low profile, Trafficante initially gave the name Luis Santos when detained, in a desperate attempt to conceal his identity and maintain his usual anonymity. This ruse did not last long. In January of the following year, after fleeing to the Cuban capital to avoid the subpoena, Trafficante admitted his true identity to the Cuban National Police. Among those arrested alongside Santo Trafficante Jr. were some of the most powerful and feared names in the Cosa Nostra and the Mafia Commission. However, the legal consequences of Appalachin extended beyond these multiple arrests. In January 1959, Trafficante and 19 other men were charged with conspiring to obstruct justice by lying about the nature of the mob meeting. They were found guilty, fined, and sentenced to prison terms ranging from 3 to 5 years. However, in an ironic twist of fate, these convictions were overturned on appeal the following year, highlighting the Mafia's ability to evade justice. Through influence and legal maneuvers, the Mafia managed to evade justice. The Appalachin meeting marked a crucial turning point, providing the first concrete evidence of a national criminal conspiracy known as the Mafia, something the FBI had previously denied. This revelation shattered the facade of denial maintained by authorities and triggered a series of more aggressive measures by law enforcement against Mafia activities. For Santo Trafficante Jr., this experience was a bittersweet mix of humiliation and reaffirmation of his status as an influential boss. These events shook Santo Trafficante Jr. on American soil. Now, it is essential to highlight what had been happening for years in the Caribbean islands, implicating him once again. The last years of Fulgencio Batista's government were a whirlwind of economic chaos, brutal repression, and his ultimate downfall from power. Faced with such atrocities, the opposition to the regime did not remain idle. The July 26th movement, led by a young revolutionary named Fidel Castro, emerged as a significant force. Before becoming the revolutionary icon of the Cold War, Fidel Castro was simply a young and charismatic lawyer deeply troubled by Cuba's political and economic situation. In 1950, he graduated from the University of Havana's law school and began his career as a lawyer. However, law was just a tool for something bigger: politics. He joined the reformist Cuban People's Party and quickly positioned himself as a candidate for a seat in the House of Representatives for the elections scheduled for June 1952. Despite his aspirations, in March of that year, Fulgencio Batista orchestrated a coup that overthrew the nascent Cuban democracy, securing his second term. This sudden event cancelled the elections for which Castro was a candidate, and pushed him to the brink of political despair. Determined to challenge the coup, Fidel tried to use the judicial system, but it was so corrupt that his efforts were futile. It was at this point that Castro decided that words would not be enough. On July 26, 1953, he led an armed attack on the Moncada barracks, one of Batista's regime's military strongholds. The attack failed spectacularly, and Castro was captured, but this event marked the beginning of his revolutionary career. The date would become the symbol of the revolutionary movement he would lead. By the late 1950s, Batista's regime was already facing growing economic difficulties. The final blow came with the Sugar Act of 1956, a ruthless move that drastically reduced Cuban sugar trade to benefit American producers. This was a direct punch to the gut of the national economy, which heavily relied on sugar exports. The uncertainty about the future of this vital industry caused a collapse of support within the government and the agricultural sector, leaving Batista increasingly isolated and vulnerable. With fewer allies and more enemies each day, anti-Batista militants organized a campaign of harassment and sabotage that constantly kept the regime in check. In the provinces, the resistance was felt with surprise attacks and a fierce determination to overthrow the president. In his desperation to cling to power, Batista responded with brutal repression. He controlled the university, the press, and the Congress with an iron fist, plunging Cuba into true political chaos. The streets of Cuba became a battleground, with murders and disappearances becoming daily occurrences. However, the more Batista tried to crush the resistance, the more hatred towards his regime grew. Corruption reached unprecedented levels during his 8 years out of power, from 1944 to 1952, as Batista enjoyed his enrichment at the expense of the Cuban people. His return to power only intensified this whirlwind of embezzlement. The year 1958 marked the turning point. The Cuban Revolution, led by Castro, gained unstoppable momentum in the fall. The revolutionary forces launched a decisive attack that left Batista's regime in a precarious condition. Seeing the inevitable end, Batista decided to flee the country on January 1st, 1959. He didn't leave empty-handed. He took a personal fortune of over $300 million. The Cuban Revolution achieved its goal of overthrowing Batista's authoritarian government, marking the beginning of a new era in Cuban politics. His fall was met with jubilation by Cubans who saw in Castro and his movement a hope for a better future. Thus, the downfall of a major ally of Santo Trafficante Jr. in the Caribbean was set in motion. Batista, who had wielded much power and aided Trafficante in his misdeeds, was no more. However, it must be said that the Cuban Revolution was not merely a Russian revolution with a mojito twist. It aimed to combine the ideas of Martí, the national hero who dreamed of a free Cuba, with Marxism-Leninism, the doctrine that promised a proletarian paradise. The objective was clear: to liberate Cuba from imperialist yoke and emancipate the Cuban people. But how was this achieved? By taking control of absolutely everything. Private property became public enemy number one. Landowners, entrepreneurs, and small property owners saw their assets expropriated in the name of social justice. The implicit message was clear: your land is no longer yours. It belongs to the people, and by people, they meant the state. In summary, The Cuban Revolution began as an ambitious project of national liberation and redemption, but quickly transformed into a regime that crushed private property and any form of dissent. This entire story is tied to the fact that Santo Trafficante Jr. and other mobsters had turned Havana into their own mob playground. They controlled significant assets on the island, including casinos, hotels, and other businesses that generated immense fortunes for them. However, the arrival of Fidel Castro and his revolutionary government drastically changed their fate. When Castro took control of Cuba, one of his first objectives was to eliminate the Mafia's influence. This meant shutting down the casinos, nationalizing hotels, and seizing other Mafia-controlled enterprises. Santo Trafficante Jr. and his associates saw their Havana empire crumble almost overnight. Castro's government not only deprived them of their lucrative businesses, but also sent a clear message that Cuba was no longer a playground for foreign mobsters. This marked the end of an era for Trafficante and his peers, as the Cuban Revolution fundamentally reshaped the island's political and economic landscape. To dismantle the organized crime that had infiltrated Cuba's economy, Castro's government took decisive action. Adding to this was the disappearance of private property, which hit Trafficante like a bomb. His assets and properties, including iconic locations in Havana like the Tropicana Casino and the hotels Riviera and Capri, were swiftly seized. The confiscation of these assets represented a significant financial loss for Trafficante and marked the end of his influence in the region. In 1959, our protagonist was detained by Cuban authorities and subsequently expelled from the country as an undesirable person. Watching his properties pass into state hands, he fled to the United States, leaving behind the empire he had built in Cuba. Trafficante never made specific comments about the properties Castro confiscated, but the loss was evidently devastating. Castro's government boasted of having eradicated organized crime from the island, with the expropriation of Trafficante's assets being a crucial part of this effort. Unwilling to accept his fate without a fight, Trafficante became deeply involved in anti-Castro activities. He established contacts with various U.S. intelligence services, including the CIA and the Office of Naval Intelligence, and participated in several plots to assassinate Castro. While his exact role in each plot remains unclear, all were part of the desperate efforts by the CIA to rid the Western Hemisphere of the Cuban revolutionary leader. One attempt involved poisoned cigars. Trafficante Jr. participated in a plot to mix Castro's beloved cigars with a lethal substance. In another macabre twist, there was a plan to poison Castro's milkshake, as if playing a grim joke. Yet another bizarre plan Trafficante was involved in was a CIA scheme to get Castro to wear a poisoned wetsuit. If his clothing was harmful, the reasoning went, his chances of survival were slim. To cap it all off, a plan worthy of a soap opera or a fiction book, our protagonist and the CIA devised together a scheme to detonate Castro with an explosive seashell. All these attempts were part of the so-called Operation Mongoose, one of the most extravagant and comprehensive efforts by the CIA to eliminate Fidel Castro and his government. The operation involved a network of CIA agents, Cuban exiles, and organized crime figures. Among the most colorful and dangerous characters were Santo Trafficante Jr. and Johnny Rosselli. From a political and state security standpoint, it involved economic sabotage against the Caribbean government, hindering the island's maritime transport and funding anti-government riots. The overarching goal was to make Cuba ungovernable and undermine Fidel Castro's revolutionary positions in the eyes of the Cuban public. whose radical measures were also not helping to improve the internal situation. These plots, though unsuccessful, demonstrate the extent to which Trafficante was willing to go to regain his lost position. He worked with his traditional pursuers to conspire against a foreign government, an enemy shared by law enforcement and the Mafia alike. Applying the logic of the enemy of my enemy is my friend, Trafficante found himself collaborating with the CIA. Declassified documents from the agency in 2007 confirmed his direct connections to these assassination plans. However, Trafficante Jr. wasn't just involved in political conspiracies in Cuba, but also in the United States. John F. Kennedy, elected as the 35th President of the United States in 1960, was a charismatic young leader who promised to elevate the nation to new heights of development and power. However, his life and presidency came to an abrupt and tragic end on November 22, 1963, a day etched into collective memory as one of the greatest tragedies in American history. On that fateful day, Kennedy was in Dallas doing what politicians do best, greeting the crowd from a presidential motorcade. He rode in his open-top limousine through Dealey Plaza, accompanied by his elegant and poised wife, the governor of Texas, and his wife, Nellie. Amidst cheers and applause, a shot rang out, shattering the air and turning the scene of celebration into a nightmare. The fatal shot came from the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository, fired by Lee Harvey Oswald, a former U.S. Marine and self-proclaimed communist with sympathies for revolutionary ideas. He apparently believed that killing the president was the perfect way to express his discontent with the system. While Oswald is known as Kennedy's assassin, in 1976, FBI informant Jose Aleman claimed that in September 1962, Santo Trafficante Jr. had offered him $1 million loan to refurbish his hotel. During their conversation, Trafficante openly expressed his bitterness towards the Kennedy brothers and their attacks on figures like Jimmy Hoffa, an outspoken union leader who served as president of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters and other associated unions. Aleman, perhaps naive or cynical, mentioned to Trafficante that President Kennedy would likely be re-elected. Trafficante's response was chilling and prophetic. "No, Jose, they are going to hit him." Aleman claimed to have reported these disturbing remarks to his FBI contacts, but authorities dismissed the warnings as Mafia bravado. However, this detail would later take on a more sinister tone. In 1978, Trafficante Jr. and Aleman were called to testify before the United States House Select Committee on Assassinations. The committee was investigating potential links between Kennedy's assassin and anti-Castro Cubans, including the theory that Castro had ordered Kennedy's assassination in retaliation for CIA attempts on his life. Aleman reiterated that Trafficante had complained for hours during a meeting in June or July 1963 about Kennedy's crackdown on organized crime. Trafficante had used the phrase, "they are going to hit him," which Aleman initially interpreted as a prediction of Kennedy's assassination. However, this phrase could be interpreted in two different ways. Aleman believed it meant Kennedy would be physically attacked, as indeed happened, while another interpretation suggested Trafficante knew they were discussing Kennedy's potential electoral defeat. Nevertheless, the next day, Trafficante testified, vehemently denying having said those words. Beginning in 1992, Trafficante's former lawyer, Frank Regano, made an even more explosive revelation. He claimed to have relayed a request from Jimmy Hoffa to Trafficante and New Orleans mob boss Carlos Marcello to kill Kennedy. Regano also asserted that on his deathbed, Trafficante confessed that Marcello's original plan was to assassinate Robert Francis Kennedy, the president's brother, which was allegedly connected to the congressional crackdown on the Mafia in the United States. According to Regano, there were potential witnesses who could support this claim, though he refused to name them publicly for fear of retaliation. It was never confirmed whether Trafficante Jr. was actually involved in the assassination. Following these tumultuous years, Trafficante Jr.'s next endeavors were far from tranquil. In 1968, he became involved with Vietnam, not as a tourist, but through the CIA's covert Operation Phoenix. This program aimed to dismantle the infrastructure of the National Liberation Front of Vietnam, a political group fighting against the United States and North Vietnam during the Vietnam War, with the goal of unifying the country under a socialist republic. The operation, often described as a state terror maneuver, saw the CIA collaborating with organized crime elements like Trafficante to gather intelligence and execute missions. In the late 1960s, Trafficante Jr. became involved in CIA operations in Vietnam, notably Operation Phoenix, and also had a hand in Operation Red Rock. Details of his specific activities in Vietnam remain sparse, but his role was significant, likely facilitating covert operations that the CIA preferred to keep away from public scrutiny. By this point, Trafficante and the CIA had formed an unsettling partnership, underscoring the lengths to which the US government would go to achieve its objectives abroad. In the 1970s, Trafficante Jr. expanded his illicit activities to tropical lands, particularly Costa Rica. Here, the Mafia boss not only enjoyed the sun and beaches, but also engaged in shady businesses that kept his wallet full and his adrenaline high. However, dirty dealings have a funny way of backfiring. In 1973, at nearly 60 years old, while enjoying his time in Costa Rica, local authorities decided it was time to put a stop to his activities and arrested him. Yet, true to the style of a crime boss of his stature, his time behind bars was brief. Shortly after, Trafficante was released, likely due to influences beyond Costa Rican borders. The 1980s marked the beginning of Trafficante Jr.'s definitive decline. An infamous veteran of organized crime involved in numerous national and international scandals, he began to suffer from deteriorating health. Cardiac issues were his primary struggle, with heart attacks and bypass surgeries becoming part of his medical routine. His overall condition was delicate, further compounded by speculation of chronic obstructive pulmonary disease or lung cancer, though these remain conjectures. Despite constant medical attention, including surgeries, therapies, and medications, his health continued to decline with each passing day. Amidst this complex health panorama, in 1986, Trafficante was summoned to court for his alleged involvement in the illegal activities at King's Court. This was no ordinary nightclub. Established by members of the Bonanno crime family from New York, it was a hub of illegal activities where card gambling and unlicensed alcohol consumption were rampant. Eventually, the nightclub was infiltrated and operated as a well-designed trap by the FBI, aiming to penetrate Trafficante's organization and gather evidence against him. When confronted with justice, a weary Trafficante Jr. vehemently denied any involvement in the operations of King's Court, dismissing it all as a maneuver by his enemies to discredit him. However, several witnesses and documents confirmed his presence and direct involvement in the operations of the nightclub. Despite all the evidence and testimonies against him, Trafficante was not convicted. Once again, it seemed like justice slipped through the fingers of the law in his final struggles as a criminal. On March 15th, 1987, just months after the King's Court incident, he underwent cardiac surgery at the Texas Heart Institute in Houston, Texas. Instead of improving his health, the procedure worsened it, and he passed away 2 days later at the age of 72. Following his death, Vincent Loscalzo assumed leadership of the criminal family. Loscalzo, a Sicilian-born mafioso born in the late 1930s, owned multiple properties in Tampa by the time of Trafficante's passing. His wife, Josephine, lived to the age of 95, passing away 28 years later. In the mid-2010s, most of the Trafficante properties were auctioned off in St. Petersburg, Florida. And so ends the tumultuous tale of Santo Trafficante Jr., a man whose life was intertwined with some of the most significant events of the 20th century. His story serves as a stark reminder of the complex web of politics, crime, and international intrigue that shaped our world. If you found this story captivating, we invite you to dive deeper into the hidden histories that shape our world. Hit that subscribe button to ensure you never miss our latest uploads. Your likes and comments not only motivate us, but also help others discover these fascinating narratives. And if you think someone else might enjoy this content, don't hesitate to share it with them. Remember, history is full of untold stories waiting to be uncovered. Join us on this journey of discovery, one video at a time. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep exploring the past to understand our present.